Welcome to the Traveling Professors. I'm Professor Bob.
And I'm Professor Sheri.
And together we are
the Traveling Professors.
Today we're going to be looking at the Museum of Archaeology at Thessaloniki. But we're also going to take a little trip through the city and see the hotel and some of the other sites very briefly. But our main goal was to see the museum. We were in Thessaloniki, Greece at this time in late December, because this is the first part of our trip going to Egypt. And so we decided we hadn't been to Macedonia, let's do our Alexander thing. And we've already gone through Pella, the Pella Museum, and the tomb at Vergina. So now we go to the Archaeological Museum. And I would point out one of the things that happened is I assumed that everything that was with Alexander and Philip would be there. The guidebooks and things I'd seen before had that in their famous gold room. And of course, after going to Vergina, we found out that all of that had been moved to that museum. So it was a good thing that we went out there. But they still have a pretty spectacular collection of gold objects. But the main object that we'll be seeing is known as the Dionysius Crater. So let's get started. We had flown into Athens the day before from the United States. Unfortunately, the airline lost our luggage, so we would have to wait a couple of days to get that. So we went off to Thessaloniki with just minimal baggage and some vouchers to pick up some other clothes. The flight from Athens to Thessaloniki is just spectacular, and we saw Mount Olympus covered with magnificent snow. And here's our hotel. It was called the Tourist Hotel. It's an older hotel. It was very nice. It was only a block from the seashore, right in the heart of the city. And so here is our room. It's a nice queen-size bed with a nice view of the... And of course, we are in the city about 11 o'clock in the morning after checking in. So it's time to take off. So we walked down the block to the promenade, to the area where the harbor is, and started walking towards the museum. Now you can see where we are headed. That object in the far distance is the White Tower. The museum is a couple of blocks over from that. This building right here happens to be where we ate all of our meals. We had lunch here. Here's the inside of the downstairs. And we had dinner the first night there as well. When we went to have dinner the last night, they said, why don't you go upstairs into our main dining room, which had a much better view of the sea area. And took our time, walked down the way there, and here is the White Tower. It's a 100-foot tall tower built in the 1400s, and it's actually on other older foundations, and it was originally part of the main fortification that then went up to the Acropolis, but this is all that remains down here. And in the 1700s, it was known as the Janissary Prison, or just known as simply as the Tower of Blood. We did not get a chance to get up and crawl around on the top of it, because we were probably going to be in the museum for a while. Here's looking back where we started. Of course, as I said before, it's December. It's a little chilly, not for us from the Midwest part of the United States, but for the Greeks, it was pretty chilly. Then here's a little better view of the White Tower, and then we walked a little past it because they did have a couple of tourist boats, and this is what I refer to as the pirate boat, where you could get on it and take a couple of hour tour and have lunch and what have you. But that was not on our agenda, so we're going to head off to the museum. After a couple of blocks from the White Tower, we come into view of the Museum of Archaeology at Thessaloniki, which covers the Greek history in Macedonia from prehistoric times until present. And there's a wonderful bronze of good old Philip II, King of Macedonia. And then here we are getting ready to walk into the doors, and then here's one of the sarcophagus from the area. And so we got a little closer view of it with the wonderful carvings. So a lot of the goods in this museum are grave goods. And so one of the things that you have, and why are there so many grave goods and why do we seem to find them? The Greeks believed that goods that you had were a result of the gods giving you blessing. So when you died, frequently they buried a lot of stuff with you because they didn't believe the rest of the family had ownership of it unless the deceased had given it to you. So there is a wonderful wealth of these things, and even when you go to temples, you excavate a temple, you will find goods that were donated to the temple. And it was illegal, even if the object was destroyed, to get rid of it. And it was basically then buried on the site. For example, if you go to Delphi, you'll see objects that were destroyed by rock slides and whatever, and they were buried near the temple where it was originally dedicated, because it had been dedicated to the gods, and by goodness, it's going to stay there for the gods. In one of the first displays, they show this picture of one of the excavations of a grave site. And as you can see, they're not really very orderly. And of course, you'll find all sorts of various goods. Here's an example of some of the grave goods that were found in this excavation. Some people would be buried in urns, their ashes. Some people, as you can see, are stretched out. There's all sorts of different ways that the Greeks dealt with the dead. Next, we came to a display of military items that were found in graves. So here we have a unique heel protection where you have a spike on it that you would put into your sandals. Then here's the beautiful bronze greaves that protected the lower legs. And here are some of the arrowheads. And notice how I enjoy how they have them on these see-through pieces of plastic so you can get kind of an idea of trajectory and what they would have looked like in the air. And then here we have another display where you have arrows that have the ends on them which insert into the arrow shaft itself in different styles. And then they had a bag here of sling bullets. And some of them will have the commander's name on it. Some of them will have the city's name on it. And sometimes they'll even have the king's name on it at some times or another. And finally, we come to one of the helmets that the Greeks wore. It's not quite Corinthian. Every Greek area has different variations of it. It was a very nice selection of military grave goods. Next, we come into an area where we have tombs. And here's Sheri standing in front of, well, actually she's walking by, because remember, this is Greece. We don't want to pose with anything. So this is one of the tomb doors, and one where we give you an idea of size, and that is the one without Sheri. And then here's a close-up showing the latches, where you would have it sliding, and then the handles. Very, very nice, very well done. And then here is a sarcophagus made out of terracotta, and you would have buried people in this as well. So you have all, like I said before, we have all kinds of different methods of dealing with the deceased in Greece, all the way from cremation to sarcophagi to just burying them in the ground stretched out or in the fetal position. Next, we came to an area where they had this masking exhibit. So here is an example of one of the burials that we saw from the Pella Museum, where we have the soldier with his helmet and then this gold mask over his face. Well, later on, and the Romans did this particularly, but later on they would do casts of the people and then make a mask. So here is how they showed the different methods of doing it. So here is the first one where you would make a kind of a crude cast of the person's face. Then you would refine that to make this so that you can then later on then manufacture it and smooth it out and make it more like the person's face. If you remember, in ancient Rome, every family member from the patricians, for the most part, had this done. And on the death of a member of the family, these masks would be taken out and given to actors who would then follow the newly deceased member of the family in a parade showing all the ancestors back behind them. And it's one of the reasons why the Romans gave Julius Caesar a state funeral, because they were concerned that if they gave him a family funeral, all the people that had in his family who had done things for Rome would be a little too much for the people to see and they might revolt. But this was a really nice display of the mask making process. And then here is a display where they show a bed burial. So you have this outside picture of what the tomb would have looked like, and then the interior of what it would have looked like. And then here you have the objects that were in there, the long bed and then a shorter one, and they were all marked, engraved. And then here's an example of very popular diadem headdress for women that's found frequently in tombs. You know, the palaces and wealthy homes had these wonderful mosaics, and the museum has a wonderfully preserved mosaic here, and you can see it, have the size of it with Sheri in the picture. And by the way, she's 5'3". And then here's a closer view of one of the main sections of it, and then here's a back away view of the full size of it from a different direction. So these mosaics are really quite stunning. The glass display at the museum at Thessaloniki was really exquisite. You know, they have a bowl, they had this beautiful decanter. I love the way they had the indirect lighting so that you could see the various pictures. And then here you have a display, and you look at that like, what in the world is that? That's actually a nursing bottle that you can put milk in there, and then the baby suckles it out the one end. And then these bird-like pieces of glass are actually perfume containers. In one section of the museum where they had a lot of the statuary, they had a small temple. And here was a display diagram. And you see the brown material in the diagram is the actual artifacts that are in the museum. And then they have put in some other pieces that would give you an idea of its representation. So I'm standing at what would have been the entrance to this little temple, looking back to the end. And then here is the view in the middle where you would have had the entrance to the idol area, or the idol itself. And then here I am standing in the back with the columns on either side. So they had this really nice little section of the temple. Now we're going down into the basement where they have a special display area. And the display was about a family who made some of the first reproductions of artifacts from Mycenae. And then the family then developed this whole process of doing this to make museum replicas, and they've gone into many museums around the world. And so they had some of these displays from objects that they have manufactured, and you can see if you've watched the walkthrough of the treasure of Mycenae, you've seen these. But here we have one of the daggers, and there's a sword, and then here we have the two-handed goblet, and then what is known as the mask of Agamemnon. But those are all replicas. And there was an interesting story about the whole family that was down there with the rest of it. But I believe that's a traveling exhibit. Now we enter the gold room. And as you can see, the piece de resistance is what is known frequently as the Dionysian Crater, but it's technically known as Derveni Krater. Derveni is where it was found. It's discovered in 1962 in a tomb, and Derveni is not really very far from Thessaloniki. Now it weighs 40 kilograms. It weighs 88 pounds. It is 35.6 inches high. The crater is made out of bronze, but the bronze has a very high content of tin. It has 15% tin, and that gives it its superb golden sheen without the use of any gold at all. Now, this is dated from the 4th century BCE and is probably made in Athens. Now, large metalwork vessels are extremely rare to survive in ancient Greek art, and this is one of the most outstanding, and it represents the best one from the Hellenistic era. Now, it was discovered as a funeral urn for a Thessalian aristocrat, whose name is engraved on the vase, Anaxagoras from Larissa. Now, craters are usually mixing bowls, which are vessels used to mix diluted wine with water and probably various spices as well. The drink is then ladled out to fellow banqueteers at a ritual or festival of celebrations. When excavated, the Derveni Krater contained 1,968 grams of burnt bones belonging to a man aged 35 to 50, as well as a younger woman. So it is stunning in its central case. On the belly of the crater is a frieze in low relief, which is devoted to the divinities of Ariadne and Dionysus. They are surrounded by reveling satyrs and maeads in their Bacchic retinue. And you can see in this one, this is where you see Ariadne and Dionysus. Here we see some other members of the festivals cavorting around along with Ariadne and Dionysus. And then here's Dionysus and Ariadne once again. And then on the top, where the handles and everything are, top of the crater is decorated with palm leaves, acanthus, garlands. The top of the neck presents a frieze of animals, and most of all, there are 4 statuettes. 2 maenads, Dionysius, and a sleeping satyr, which are casually seated on the shoulders of the vase. So it's quite stunning, and it's in a case that allows you to go all the way around it to view it. So that is the masterpiece of the gold room. Now we'll go look at some of the other pieces. Well, the gold room has all sorts of other gold objects, not just the Dionysian Crater, but it is the big show. Of course, in the past, this is where the larynx of Philip of Macedonia was kept, as well as all the objects there. But again, they're in the Vergina. So here we have some earrings. Beautiful different styles of earrings from different time periods, even into the Hellenistic age. And then we have some necklaces, incredible workmanship. Again, different styles to choose from. And the headdresses. Now these headdresses are both for men and women. This one I believe is a man's. And here we have one that's one of the princesses. And you also find some gold-covered greaves as well in this. And we have some drinking containers. So there's quite a bit of other gold objects. There's actually coins and all sorts of other things. After the gold room, it was time to head back to the hotel. But here's a view outside of the museum looking up to the Great Acropolis and fortifications that run across the top of the city. It was something we didn't have time for because the next day we were doing our trip to see Pella and Vergina, and after that we were then flying back to Athens. Have to come back another time. That evening we went back to the restaurant and sat on the higher level, and this is the view out of the windows from above, and here's the whole restaurant from the top, all covered in glass. And we had our usual Greek dinner with octopus and other assorted Greek delicacies. Sheri and I absolutely love eating in Greece. Even though it was almost New Year's, there were still some of the festivities from Christmas. So this was in the plaza near our restaurant and, of course, our hotel. And they still had the trees up, and they still had other venues and a little train with Santa Claus driving everybody around with his reindeer. So there were still some interesting festivities going on here. Sheri and I hope you enjoyed the tour. Please come by our YouTube channel at Bob Packett, and please subscribe and leave some comments. Thank you very much. I've been doing podcasting on history for over 15 years. I've got over 4,000 shows, and I've done CDs, which of course can be sent out as USBs. So if you would really like to get more on history for free, then come by my website, as you see here, historyaccordingtobob.com, and see what's there. So thank you very much again.